Alrighty, hello and welcome to the second episode of Question and Answer. And hopefully the sound will be a little better this time, or at least no worse, because it's rainy outside and it's loud on this trailer. So I'll start answering questions. First question is from Sakyaputta, which maybe means it's from a monk, son of the Sakyans. And he asks, would you care to elaborate on your criticism of Venerable Nyanovira? Okay, Venerable Nyanovira was an English monk who was ordained in Sri Lanka like back around 1950 and committed suicide in 1965 due to a very distracting health issue. And one of the very first blog posts I ever wrote years and years ago was about Nyanovira, criticizing some of his beliefs. And so, first off, I think he made a serious mistake in that he considered all of the core texts to be absolutely infallible. And the core texts are considered to be the oldest Theravada Buddhist texts, which are the first 4 books of Vinaya and the first 4 Nikayas of the Sutta Pitaka and the first several books of the Khuddaka Nikaya. So he rejected most of the Khuddaka Nikaya and all of the Abhidhamma Pitaka and a few other books. And he really didn't have any, he didn't put forth any evidence that it was all infallible, the core texts. He just took that as a kind of axiom that wasn't really self-evident at all, especially with all the talking animals and fire-breathing dragons and the flat earth floating on water and all that. So he just sort of arbitrarily came up with this idea that the core texts were absolutely infallible, and then he based this hyper-intellectual system, this interpretation of Dhamma, largely influenced by existentialism, like modern European existentialism. And apparently he believed himself to have become an Arya while essentially hammering out his point of view intellectually. So, I think there's a good chance he was mistaken in that regard, and he was very hyper-intellectual, kind of intellectually arrogant, intolerant of other people's point of views. He just sincerely believed that anyone who disagreed with him on Dhamma was just flat out wrong. And also, maybe most importantly of all, maybe even more important than his interpretation of the text, was his belief that mysticism is just absolute bullshit. And we'll get back to mysticism a little later, but I really think that the Buddha himself was a mystic. So just a purely rationalistic, intellectual approach to Dhamma is not going to get you very far, in my opinion. And that's what Venerable Nyanovira was doing. And he's got lots of followers now, relatively speaking. So next question, from Bodhisattva 969. Do you think it is possible and important to create a right-wing or conservative Buddhism as an antipole to feminized Western Buddhism? And then he continues saying, in some Buddhist groups, you just think the people really need help because they are mentally ill and see Buddhism just as a self-help group. I think if somebody hears or reads what they're talking about in these groups, nobody wants to have to do anything with Buddhism. With regard to it being possible and important to create a conservative, traditionalist kind of Buddhism in the West, sure, I think it's possible, and it could be important. If you think Buddhism or Dhamma in the West is important, then that would be important. So, yes, it is possible, and I am making my own little contributions to that just by doing stuff like this. So, there's going to be more questions along those lines. So, the main question is just, do I think it's possible and important? And so the answer to that is yes, and probably yes. Next, from Inmanus, alias Frank Inman, who asks very long questions. Next, Sissy. What role does the laity householder play in the conditioning of the world by which beings arise primed for renunciation? In other words, how do particular peoples and their cultures make the world suitable for the continuance or arising of the bodhisattva? In what ways do laity householders cause deterioration, degeneration in the bodhisattva? I ask so as to help the bodhisattva to the best of my ability as a layman. Well, I mean, Buddhism arises from its culture, and the culture is mostly lay people. So obviously lay people are going to be setting the stage, and it's mainly lay people and like kings or politicians or whatever, the people in charge especially, that are determining the beliefs of the people and the direction that the culture goes and all that. So sure, in that respect, definitely just the beliefs and attitudes of the people are going to very heavily condition the state of Dhamma and the state of any kind of spiritual renunciation that's going on. Also, I've read that spiritual renunciation increases when things are really shitty. So when lay people, and the kings especially, are just messing things up, then the culture or the civilization starts reaching a kind of a crisis point, and more people are just going to bail out in despair of worldly existence. So there's that aspect to it too. But yeah, I mean, it's the lay people that support the monks, the renunciants, especially like a strict Buddhist renunciant isn't even allowed to feed himself, so he has to be fed by the lay people, supported by the lay people. So, next question. As the lotus starts in the muck and the mud, so does the noble disciple begin from the womb and from the world of his people, who are of particular ways and cultures and given to various worldly passions. Elaborate, please. Well, the lotus simile is really common in the really ancient texts, and the main point of it is that you've got this beauty arising from mud, and the mud doesn't stick to the lotus at all. It's like the lotus has like a non-stick surface, so water and mud and stuff like that just doesn't stick to it at all. And in the text it's referring to the monk having a mind that's like that, or a spirit that's like that nothing sticks to it, like no kind of defilements, like any kind of mental muck doesn't stick to it. So that's the main point of the lotus. And let's see, the noble disciple will begin from the womb and from the world of his people, who are particular ways, cultures. Yeah, I mean, eventually you just reach the stage of purity where the conditioned environment really, I mean, it always has conditioning effects and all that, but it just doesn't stick. You don't identify with it. It doesn't really influence you deeply. It's just all external. It's just all external stuff. In fact, in the oldest texts, even your own thoughts are considered to be external to you. But that's like a whole show trying to explain that one. Next question from Frank. Do you think a wheel-turning monarch is needed to realign the laity householders? In ancient days, the king would instill order and look after the realm of men. Is there truth to this? Is such a thing necessary? Or perhaps I should ask, do you think we need leadership from or for the laity who can reestablish or maintain various customs which could optimize our support for the Bhikkhu Sangha? Well, a wheel-turning monarch pretty much it's not really necessary, because I doubt that there has ever really been one. Maybe Ashoka would come as close as there has been one, but he certainly wasn't king of the whole world like a wheel-turning monarch is supposed to be. He didn't even conquer or rule the entirety of India, although he did rule most of it. So, yeah, I mean, the people who are in high places, like the Rush song, yeah, they are the most important with regard to influencing public opinion and all that, and just the attitudes and all that. But yeah, I don't know to what extent nowadays in the West there's going to be much of a turning towards Dhamma, unless it's just in a state of crisis and despair. So otherwise, you're just going to have like fringe group, just Buddhist people kind of around the edges of society, or maybe even in the midst of society, except with their spiritual beliefs being on the edges, who are just doing the best they can. It's just doing what they can to support Dhamma. So, organizing a mass movement, that's big thinking, but who is going to do that? I have no idea. Next question. Perhaps we can form an order of sorts for lay householders who can keep the fires of older traditions going, our highest veneration being the renunciant monks and or ascetics, but as householders not quite ready, for some of us feel a duty to at least help keep suitable conditions for those who can really go for it. Do you think such an initiative would help? Sure, I mean, monks can't exist without the support of lay people. So, if there are Buddhists who really want monks or just like really advanced practitioners, then that's like been one of the main purposes of a Buddhist layperson from the very beginning, is to support the heavy hitters, or the people that are really dedicating their lives to really going for it. So, I mean, some sort of order. I've considered that. I've talked about that sort of thing. Because, like, full ordination in the West is very different from full ordination in Asia. And that's another question that's lower down on the list here. So I'll get into that later. But, I mean, especially in the West, a monk has to receive more support than he does in Asia from people who have less cultural conditioning supporting monks. So it is kind of a difficult situation in the West, partly just because we're not living in a Buddhist culture. Okay, next question. It is said all the Buddhists taught the four right efforts: to develop wholesome states, to maintain wholesome states, to abandon unwholesome states, and to prevent the arising of unwholesome states. This seems to conflict greatly with what many modern secular spiritual teachers teach, in that many say we should not judge. But if we do not judge, then we are not discerning, and if we are not discerning, then to me it would seem that we are not using our mindfulness properly for our long-term welfare and benefit. Also, this teaching seems to me to parallel various alchemical teachings of various Western Hermetic schools that involve purification of various things. Just as we can distill water from foul mixtures with heat, so too can we distill good mental states with mindfulness and right effort. Again, this all to me seems to fly in the face of the modern degenerate teachers of this age. Could you perhaps elaborate on this? Specifically, right effort, and how do judgment, discernment, and mindfulness factor in? Well, with regard to right efforts, you're essentially just trying to increase the amount of kusala, or skillful mental states, ethical mental states, and decrease the amount of unethical ones, which is just getting you closer to enlightenment, increasing your wisdom and all that. And you have to use mindfulness just so that you'll be aware of what kind of state you're in, and the judgment and discernment. I mean, you have to exercise that to make decisions, and the more wise your judgment and discernment are going to be, and the more mindful you are, the more likely you're going to make good and right decisions. So the four right efforts, it's fairly straightforward. Just any good habits you've got, you try to maintain and strengthen them, and any good habits you don't got, you try to establish them, and any bad habits you've got, you try to get rid of them, and then you try to make sure you don't get any new bad habits, which is mainly just purifying and simplifying yourself. And you use the mindfulness and discernment as tools to accomplish that. Okay, next question from Nardi. How do you interpret the mindfulness of inside and outside of body, sensation, mind, and objects of mind in the Satipatthana Sutta? That's a good question. And the way I understand it is you can be mindful sort of vicariously watching somebody else. you're mindful of their movements and their speaking and that sort of thing. So with regard to outside of the body, that is my interpretation of it. And I think that may be the orthodox interpretation also. Like if you're mindful of like bodily movements, for example, then you can be mindful of your own bodily movements, or you can be observing somebody else and in a way kind of putting yourself in their place and being mindful through them vicariously. That's my best understanding of that one. Next question from Average Dud, possibly Average Dude, but it's spelled Average Dud. Hi Sadhu, Nipa Pancha concept would reconcile Mahayana non-dualism. By the way, where can I study this concept further? Okay, Nipa Pancha is a synonym for Nibbana, and literally it means something like non-diversification. So it's like, non-diversity. And that concept goes way back to the most ancient texts. It was more important in the most ancient texts than it came to be later on. Like some versions of Paticca Samuppada, or dependent co-arising, start with papancha as the beginning. That's the beginning of the whole cycle of birth and death and suffering, is this mental diversification where you're distinguishing this from that, which is like the opposite of mysticism. Instead of like a holistic just awareness of just the consciousness itself or whatever, you're like discerning this from that, and you're creating the 10,000 things. It's like in the Tao Te Ching, it's like, first you have the Tao, from the Tao comes the one, from the one comes the two, and then from the two comes the 10,000 things, something like that. So it goes all the way back, and then Theravada became more analytic and intellectual and kind of veered away from mysticism, whereas Mahayana was trying to get back to these early teachings. And so if you want to study the concept further, probably the best book on the subject is Concept and Reality by Bhikkhu Nyanananda, which is published by the Buddhist Publication Society. And that's the whole thing. The whole book is him discussing, using ancient Pali texts, the meaning of the word papancha. And nipapancha is just the opposite of papancha. So nipapancha is nirvana, and papancha is the samsaric 10,000 things. It's the matrix that we live on. It's the flickering shadows on the walls of Plato's cave. But also, in addition to concept and reality, just reading the Atthaka Vagga of the Sutta Nipata, or there are certain old suttas just throughout the Sutta Pitaka, like in the Samyutta Nikaya, there are some ones called the cosmologist. I think in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation he calls it the cosmologist. Or the Dighanaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, or the Sakapatthana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya. The central part of that is considered to be very like archaic Buddhism, older than sort of the finished orthodox system. And so it's, to some degree, it's unorthodox, and it puts more emphasis on just non-intellectuality as a way of getting enlightened. Whereas later on, Theravada Buddhism became known as Vibhajavada, which is the doctrine of analysis, and became just very hyper-intellectual, in a different way from Nyanovira, who is also, in my opinion, making the mistake of taking a hyper-intellectual approach to Dhamma. Okay, next question, also by Average Dud. Does the perennial philosophy manifest in the Buddhist teachings? In the perennial philosophy, that's what Aldous Huxley called it, and it's mysticism, essentially. And it's kind of a trick question. I mean, in a way, Buddhism definitely was mystical to begin with, but the mystical philosophy usually refers to mysticism in terms of like God or some sort of absolute. And the absolute is so absolute, it transcends duality. It transcends the papancha, or the differentiation between is and isn't. or existence and non-existence. Like in old Buddhist texts, even existence and non-existence are considered just be mental states. They're conditioned mental states. And so they're ultimately based on delusion. So most mystical philosophies or spiritual systems will, they'll talk about the absolute as just it, or even he, like in a theistic mysticism, those call it God. Whereas Buddhism goes with isn't. I mean, you have to choose is or isn't because that's just the way languages are. And both are a mistake. I mean, it's like the absolute transcends is and isn't. But most mystical schools choose is and then call it God or Tao or whatever. Whereas in Buddhism, the Buddha, for reasons of his own, possibly because of the culture going back to the Indus Valley civilization in northern India, he just went with isn't because he considered that to be less likely to result in serious mistakes and clinging, where you're clinging to this absolute, that you have this idea in your mind and then it just becomes like an obstacle because you're clinging to this concept in your mind instead of just experiencing the reality of it. So in Buddhism, they just don't talk about it much, or at least in Theravada Buddhism, early, like archaic Buddhism, they kind of talked around it, and Mahayana kind of talks around it sometimes too. But the idea goes all the way back to the earliest Buddhism. Okay, now questions from MYWLAM, and I've been told that that is an acronym which means make your whole life a meditation. So first question from MyWillam. Are there any enlightened teachers today? If so, who and how would an ordinary householder know it? Well, that's a trick question because enlightened teachers, I mean, the only way you could know that somebody else is enlightened is if you're enlightened too. So most teachers who claim to be enlightened or are claimed to be enlightened very probably aren't. But then again, I mean, you get into the whole, it's like samsara is so messed up. We're living in a world that's ultimately based on delusion. And so, in a way, you could say that an enlightened being really doesn't exist anyway. I mean, in reality, there's no being because there's no self anyhow. And enlightenment kind of neither exists nor doesn't exist, or neither both nor neither. And so the whole thing becomes like a trick question. Although, in some paradoxical way, I assume there are beings who could be considered enlightened. And who they are nowadays, I don't know. It's like, for a long time, my favorite guess would be Paul Lowe, who's an Englishman who lives in Australia now and is very old. But, I mean, there could be, monks living alone out in the woods somewhere that nobody's ever heard of, or, who knows? I mean, like, there are people nowadays like Eckhart Tolle. He's considered to be enlightened. I think he goes around telling people, or at least he used to, that he was enlightened. So, cases like that, it's really hard to say. And so long as you're not enlightened, you'll never be able to tell. Although you can kind of weed out some of the obvious ones that aren't enlightened. It's like if somebody's just like just behaving really badly, just getting drunk and yelling and beating people up or whatever, like stealing and killing and all that, then it's a good chance they're not enlightened. I mean, if they're obviously behaving in foolish ways. But even then, sometimes it's hard to tell, because sometimes an enlightened being can act in ways that are just inexplicable. Like Neem Karoli Baba in India back in the 20th century. He did all kinds of rascally stuff, and nevertheless, he was extremely advanced. So, again, I really don't know who the enlightened teachers would be today. Okay, next question. If there aren't many enlightened Buddhists today, why? What can be done to resolve this overall lack of attainment? Well, I doubt that there have ever been very many enlightened people. I mean, you read the Buddhist texts, and the Buddha's giving a talk to thousands of people, and they all become enlightened or something. But I mean, that could just be stereotypical Indian exaggerations. So it may be, I mean, there's a good chance in the Buddha's time that a lot of his disciples did get enlightened, assuming that enlightenment really even means anything in a samsaric context. But we're just not living in an enlightened age right now. I mean, India was just a miraculously spiritual culture in the Buddhist time. It was just very, like, the whole lifestyle, it was always acknowledging that there was like a higher level of reality, and people really took that seriously, and to some degree still in India they take that seriously. But nowadays in the West especially, it's just scientific materialism. It's just the flickering shadows on the walls of Plato's cave or the ultimate reality, and anything beyond that is make-believe or something. So what can be done to resolve this overall lack of attainment? Well, you can become enlightened. I mean, you just do it yourself. Think globally but act locally. And so you just do the best you can. You mind your own garden, essentially. But also, like Buddhism, it has degenerated in that people really cling to dogmas and traditions and rituals and that sort of thing. They need that sort of thing. And in a way that gets in the way, especially if you cling to that thinking that that's going to get you enlightened. You know, it's like silavata paramasa, clinging to morality and observances. It's a hindrance. And when the enlightened teacher is gone, and really what you've got left of the system is mainly just recorded teachings, then you just got word. I mean, it's the words are no longer alive. They're just printed in books, and if they just get parroted by monks that really aren't following the teachings, then it's just, you know, it has very limited benefit. Okay, let's see. Oh, and another thing that can increase the overall lack of attainment is, again, if the shit hits the fan and we wind up in very liminal turmoil, crisis kind of a situation, which will then turn people away from the world in despair and towards something higher. Okay, next question. What is the orthodox definition, perspective of what a bodhisattva is? Okay, well, from the in Theravada Buddhism, it's called a bodhisattva with no V, and there's a good chance, I wrote an article about this a long time ago, about how bodhisattva might even be a mistranslation into Sanskrit of a Pali word. And the Pali word is bodhisattva, and bodhi means enlightenment, and sattva, like in Mahayana, means being. So a bodhisattva is an enlightenment being. But it's kind of ironic calling them an enlightenment being when what a bodhisattva is doing is putting off enlightenment indefinitely. So I think the sattva in Pali was a past participle. I think it's the verb sajjati, which means to be bound for, to be attached to, something like that. So originally the bodhisattva was someone who was bound for enlightenment, someone who was destined to become a Buddha, especially. So yeah, that's in Theravada Buddhism. A bodhisattva is someone who is destined to become a fully enlightened Buddha. Okay, next question. Where does the bodhisattva concept come from? Yeah, I think I've pretty much already answered that one. But it was originally as a being who was destined for enlightenment, like in the old text. And I think there's a question down here. Let's see. Yeah, in the small amount of text that could be attributed to the historical Buddha, does the bodhisattva concept appear? The really most ancient ones, I don't remember it, but it is definitely in like the core texts, like in the suttas, where the Buddha is talking about when he was a bodhisattva, which just meant before he became enlightened, you know, before his evening under the under the Bodhi tree on the full moon of May. So yeah, he was just the person destined to become the Buddha at that point, because he wasn't the Buddha yet. All right, next question. I have read one text that said the Buddha became a bodhisattva after his enlightenment. Is this the orthodox view of what a bodhisattva is, as opposed to Mahayana Buddhism, which defines a bodhisattva as someone prior to enlightenment? No, I don't see how that would be possible, that you become a bodhisattva after you become enlightened. Since in Mahayana Buddhism, a bodhisattva is someone who puts off enlightenment, and in Theravada Buddhism, a bodhisattva is someone who is destined to become a Buddha. And generally, in order to officially be a bodhisattva, you have to receive, I think in Burmese, it's called a byadate, where some Buddha, a fully enlightened Buddha, has to declare that, has to like prophesy that you will become a Buddha in some future life. Like our Buddha Gautama, he received his byadate from Dipankara Buddha like 28 Buddhas ago, like a zillion gajillion years ago. And there are certain other qualifications. I think you're supposed to have mastered the jhanas or something before you can become a bodhisattva, that sort of thing. But it is like an easy out for like some monks that really don't want to try for enlightenment. They'll just say, well, I'm a bodhisattva, I'm just perfecting my paramis so that I can become a fully enlightened Buddha in some future life, which really was not what the Buddha was teaching, but it takes all kinds. Okay, let's see, next question. Given the earliest teaching suggests an itinerant lifestyle, do you think there is any benefit in Theravadan monasteries closing during the spring to fall months so that the monks can adopt such a lifestyle? Would this shake-up be invigorating for practice? One problem with that is that technically summertime is the rains retreat. The monsoon season in tropical Asia, like northern India, just happens to be summertime here, which is the best time for a monk to live outside. And it's against the rules for a monk to be traveling around or living outside during the rains retreat. So that's just another way that that Theravada Buddhism and the rules of monastic discipline don't fit the temperate zone west very well. So some monasteries that do have like winter retreats or something where they just don't accept visitors for a month or more, just so the monks can not be distracted so much. But I do think that was one of the main important points of being a monk in the Buddhist time that is now lost for most monks, is that you wander around, you throw yourself at the mercy of the universe. You don't know where your next meal is coming from, you don't know where you're going to sleep that night. And it definitely forces you to sink or swim. And nowadays, with monks living easy lives in comfortable meditation centers and so forth, that they don't receive those challenges, and they can just kind of stagnate and fail to make progress just because of no real challenges. So let's see if I've answered this one. Yeah, I think I answered that. I'm fairly sure I answered that question. So I'll move to the next one. Life is suffering is a thought. Why attach to or identify with that thought and not others? This is especially relevant if one is practicing a form of meditation where one just watches his thoughts and arise and pass away. The opposite thought is life is wonderful, but again, that is just a thought. So wouldn't it be more truthful to just say life is? Well, I mean, just saying life is would be a tautology. You'd just be stating the obvious, and it would be rather pointless. Life is suffering is something that you contemplate as a way of inspiring you to practice. Because if everything is wonderful, then you don't really need to improve the situation. You don't need to purify yourself or anything, because everything is already wonderful. So life is suffering it's just a belief that has been carried through India since prehistoric times, since the Indus Valley civilization, and the Shramana traditions, especially in India, the non-Vedic traditions, they're pretty much based on the idea that the world is not a really good place to be, and so you should be trying to go beyond it or transcend it. So in that sense, it is sort of skillful means. It's just a way of inspiring you to practice more. Okay, next question. Orthodox Theravada Buddhism appears from the outside to have become very systematized, formulaic, ritualistic chanting, cultural festival days, etc. Would you agree with this statement? Yes. Isn't this contrary to the teachings of Buddha? To some degree, yeah. Do you see a way that Orthodox Theravadan Buddhism could ever move away from the systematization? there could be movements within Theravada that just don't care about Abhidhamma in the commentaries, for example, and really put more emphasis on meditation. And there are some, there's like the Sri Lankan forest tradition that got set up, I think it was back in the 70s or thereabouts, that is sort of like that. And just other teachers, different teachers will have different emphases. So, yeah, but with regard to orthodox Theravada Buddhism, you're not going to be able to change the fundamental principles of orthodox Theravada Buddhism because it's already, that's just the way it is. I mean, that's the way it's set up with the great councils and everything. So if you wanted something way more streamlined without all of the bells and whistles and the bowing and the gongs and incense and all that, then you pretty much have to start up a new kind of Buddhism, which is possible because Theravada, it's not 100% pure, authentic, original Buddhism, I'm sorry to say. So, keep what's good, and you don't really need, the rituals and the chanting. I mean, some of it is necessary, the monks have to do official acts of the Sangha, that sort of thing, where there's a certain amount of ritual and chanting involved. But, to some degree, it's just inevitable and unavoidable. Okay, next question. Do Burmese monks in the West still search through the ashes of deceased monks or teachers in search of relics, or has this cultural aspect been left behind? I don't know what they do in the West. I really have never been around a monk who was cremated in the West. So whether they go through their ashes afterwards, I don't really know. But the next question, do Burmese monks in Burma still search through the ashes of deceased monks or teachers in search of relics? Yeah, they do. In Burma, they'll search through the ashes of a monk to see if there's like the little balls or any other kind of relics that they can salvage. And if it was a really holy monk, and even if there's no balls or like the standard kind of relics, then they'll just take the pieces of bone. Like usually they'll put the fire out before everything is burned up, just so that they'll have some bones, and they can use that as relics. So they do it in Asia still, but I really can't say about America, whether it be legal or whatever. I don't know. Okay, next question. Venerable Panyabasa's blog has a header picture of a monk who has set fire to himself. As far as is known, the Buddha didn't set fire to himself, so when and where did the idea of setting fire to oneself come from? I have no idea. I really don't know. Although, I think it was back around 2017, there was like an epidemic of it. There was more than 100 Tibetan monks had immolated themselves. And I guess the Mahayana monks, like in Vietnam, did it sometimes, because the one in the picture was Vietnamese. So how it started, I have no idea. I don't think there's any mention of it in the Pali texts. Is it considered good merit to set fire to oneself? No. Technically, it's against the rules to commit suicide. Like for a Buddhist monk, to commit suicide is technically against the rules. It's not as bad as murder. I mean, literally, you're killing a human being, but since you're killing yourself, it's considered to be a minor rule. But still, the Buddha advised against it. There have been cases of monks like Godika in the Godika Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya who committed suicide, and as he was dying, he became enlightened. So there are kind of alternative outcomes, I guess. It's not necessarily bad, but as a general rule, you shouldn't commit suicide if you're a good Buddhist. What is the point of self-immolation? I think it's to get attention. It's to make a statement. It's like the famous one in Vietnam was protesting. He was just getting attention for his cause, trying to make a difference, and I think maybe he did. Next question. I have read that some who have attempted self-immolation failed. Of those who have failed, have any of them tried again? I have no idea. Maybe, probably. But I can't really say. Has Venerable Panyobasa Mahatera ever considered self-immolation? Oh, this is a good one. I haven't really considered it really seriously, although I used to joke about it. When I was living in Bellingham, when I first came back to America, I was like venerated as a saint in Burma. Just like hundreds of people, bowing down to me and literally worshiping me and everything. I was sort of like Colonel Kurtz without the heads on poles. And then I come back to America, and even the Buddhists are like, who is this guy and who the hell does he think he is? Just because of the radical night and day difference of Buddhism in Asia and Buddhism in the West. So sometimes I would just joke to people, some of my supporters, if you see me walking towards the Dharma Hall with like a 5-gallon can of gasoline, stay away from the Dharma Hall that day, because I'll be immolating myself on the front porch in protest or something. But it was just joking. I wasn't really going to do it. But I have, in a way, you kind of consider it in order to make a joke of it. Next question. How is such a deep level of trance achieved that one can attempt to self-immolate by focusing on breathing in and out? Yeah, it's hard for me to say considering that I've never immolated myself, but I assume that you're going to be in more or less of a level of trance just before you do that. I mean, it's going to be a very intense moment. You're going to be in an altered state of consciousness just right off the get-go. And yeah, I mean, if a monk knows how to go into the trance state, then he can do that, although he's going to have to be pouring the gas on himself and striking the match and all that. I've been told that after the first few seconds, then it's like your nerve endings on your skin are all destroyed anyway, so yeah, you don't really feel very much after it starts at first. So yeah, I really can't say about the actual mental states of a person who's immolating himself, because I really have no first-hand experience, or even second-hand experience. I can't remember reading anybody saying what it was like. Next question. Do monks practice different meditations than the lay practitioners who are traditionally given meditation on the breath or thought watching? And let's see, is it acceptable from the orthodox perspective that the laity practice these meditations? Well, yeah, I mean, lay people, generally, they practice elementary level meditation, and there's lots of different kinds of meditation that most lay people have never heard of, and probably even most monks. I mean, they may have read about it a little bit, but they don't really practice it. I mean, contemplating decomposing corpses is pretty much out of fashion now. There's not much of that going on, even though of the 40 standard meditation techniques, 10 of them are the meditations on decomposing corpses. And like there are some kind of meditations that are relatively common for monks, but not so common for lay people, like meditation on the 32 parts of the body, for example. So yeah, a good teacher will have monks practicing different kinds of meditation. Like the 32 parts of the body meditation is supposed to be a good one for reducing lust in young monks. Or like the repulsiveness of food is good for people that have attachment to food, or some of the kasina meditations that almost no lay people practice. There are some monks that are doing kasina meditation, which is more of a hypnotic device. It's like samatha. You go into deep trance states with that. So yeah, I mean, it's not against the rules or anything for lay people to be practicing these little known esoteric kind of meditation techniques. It's just that for the most part, they don't know how to do it. Most of them have never even heard of it. So in a way, it's sort of like, it's not as bad as Roman Catholicism, where in order to practice Catholic meditations, you pretty much have to be ordained into a contemplative order of Catholicism. So I mean, it's more open than that. But I'm sure there are some lay people that have done kasinas and the 32 parts of the body and like the 4 elements and all that. But for the most part, they just do the kindergarten level stuff, like the really elementary stuff. Let's see. What are the main differences between being a monk in Burma and a monk in the West? Oh, I could talk for an hour on that one. I've already talked about it a little bit. The night and day aspect of it, because really, I mean, it's very, very different. Being a monk in Burma, I mean, it's a Buddhist culture, and the people are taught from the time that they're toddlers that monks are like superhuman beings. The word for human being is not used for a monk, and so they're just exalted beings. And it's almost to the point where they can do no wrong, which is getting back to some of the questions up above about the influence of lay people on like the spiritual tone of a society. I've found in Burma that the places where the lay people are the most devout tend to have the sloppiest monks, because the monks know they can get away with anything, and the lay people are afraid to criticize them and are just going to have respect for them anyway. So it's good for the lay people to have a certain amount of skepticism, and like, you know, they'll be calling out the really bad monks. So in a way that's good, but it doesn't happen enough in Burma, and it maybe is in excess in the West. But the main differences between being a monk in Burma and a monk in the West, I mean, in Burma, a monk can just wander around and sleep under trees. You know, there's no electric bills. I mean, he can live for free, and he can just wander around and you know, just take a bath in the river or wherever, and it's the whole society is just kind of set up, and the rules of monastic discipline are set up for northern India, and Burma is very similar to northern India with regard to climate, and with regard to flora and fauna, and even with regard to the lifestyles of the villagers. You know, it's like the village guy goes out in the morning with his team of bullocks to plow the fields, and the girl takes the clay pot balanced on her head down to the river to get water for the hut and all that. So Theravada Buddhism fits Burma really well, whereas it's like this alien foreign import into the West, and then it just gets completely mutated almost beyond all recognition. And so, yeah, there's just major differences. I could go on, but I think I'll just move on to the next question. If anyone's really interested in just a breakdown, I think I did a video with Brian Rue a long time ago, just talking about the differences between being a monk in the West and in the East. But I can talk about it some more, because it is kind of a burning issue, and it's more of a burning issue for me than for lay people, because I'm the monk who's trying to live in the West, and yeah, I mean, it's just this foreign world where a monk in Asia is like a philodendron plant that can just grow in the jungle or whatever. You know, it lives naturally, and the rain falls on it, and it derives its nutrients from the soil and everything. Whereas a monk in the West is like that same kind of philodendron plant, but it has to live indoors, like in a greenhouse in a protected environment with people taking care of it. So it's just sort of this artificial transplant that doesn't work all that great in most cases. There are some monks that get along fine in the West, because maybe they just like hanging out with Western people, or else they've just got this comfortable, like, cloistered kind of meditation place where they can just be quiet, and it's not so different from living in Asia. Just, you know, they're just living in a cabin all by themselves with people bringing them food or something. That kind of thing could work too, I suppose. But as a general rule, it is very different, mainly just because of the weather, and even more importantly, it's the whole cultural issue of the West just is not based on Indian culture, and it's not a Buddhist society. So, yeah, it's night and day are the differences between being a monk in the West and in the East. Okay, next question. Are there many Buddhists in Burma who live in caves, trees, or close to nature, or are most of them situated in monasteries? Most of them are situated in monasteries. There's more of a forest tradition in Thailand, and I think now in Sri Lanka also, than in Burma. The Burmese monks are well known for scholarship and meditation, but the wandering around in forests and the asceticism is more of a Thai thing. So, yeah, the Burmese monks tend to be pretty wimpy, and they don't like really roughing it. So I was fortunate to be ordained in one of the few ascetic forest traditions in Burma, the Tongpulu tradition. Okay, next question. Do you speak Burmese? How much? Hopi Uzin Adopio that day, Dalime. Tamin Sa Yi thought me enough to get by. Okay, next question. Have you considered, or are you interested in online teaching such as Siri Mangalo? I ask this question as it may help in attaining your goal of independent living in the West. Online teaching, well, in a way, I'm kind of doing that now. I have done like Skype calls with people that have questions they want to ask me, that sort of thing. So in a way, I kind of already am. Although with regard to like a Zoom retreats or something, yeah, I think that's getting so kind of artificial that, yeah, I mean, if Siri Mangalo is doing it, then good for him and more power to him and everything. But I think, yeah, with regard to Zoom Buddhism, you know, I can do it a little bit, but I have no interest in like leading a virtual retreat on the internet. I'd rather do a retreat in real life. Okay, I guess I answered that one. Next question. How closely do you follow the Vinaya now? Ooh. Not nearly as closely as I used to. It may still be that I am the strictest, one of the two strictest monks here anyway. And that's kind of sad, really. But like I'm one of the only monks here that doesn't eat dinner. So, and yeah, I've been trying to follow the rules. There have been times, I mean, for most of my existence as a monk, I was just like famously strict, you know, just a hard ass, you know, maybe even almost like fanatical in being so strict. And like the only rule that I've broken from the beginning without compunction is I look into a mirror when I shave. That's like the one rule that I've always broken, just because there's a Thai book on monastic discipline where the Thai Sangha Raja said it's okay, and he didn't really have the authority to say it's okay to break the rule, but it was good enough for me at the time because it's really inconvenient trying to shave without looking into a mirror. But yeah, I don't follow it nearly as strictly, and one of the reasons for that is the whole difference between living as a monk in Burma or like Asia and in America. Because, for example, the money rules, I mean, it's just almost impossible to follow the money rules strictly. The rules against a monk handling money are so strict that not only am I not allowed to handle it myself, I'm not even allowed to consent to somebody else handling it for me. Which means that even the strict so-called exemplary monks in the West, they're all breaking the same rule. I mean, they might as well be handling it themselves because it's the same rule, strictly speaking. I mean, not handling is probably better. At least you're kind of following the spirit a little better. So, yeah. So, I mean, with regard to money, I'm not like going and buying stuff or anything, but like there's a donation jar just at the other end of this trailer that I'm sitting in on my behalf, and I'm not protesting against that. You know, people just come in and drop off money, and I'll just pick up the envelopes and stuff them into the donation jar. I really have no idea how much money is in there, but yeah, there are certain rules that I've started fudging on, especially since coming back to America this time. So I'm not nearly as strict as I used to be. And finally, the last question from Chaplin. What are the best ways for people with children and families to incorporate mindfulness and general Buddhist philosophy into their everyday lives so as to create healthier and stronger family environment? I'm thinking of small daily rituals that can become easy, habitual practice long term. Well, that's a good question. And I think the best ways for people with children and families especially is just to just try to follow the 5 precepts and take it seriously. And I mean, children learn more through imitation than through you know, what they're told. So I mean, if your parents are telling you don't lie, but then they're lying all the time, then kids are just going to learn that when they grow up, they tell their kids don't lie. Well, they lie all the time. So, I mean, yeah, you just take it seriously, and then that just kind of spreads to the children through osmosis. You know, kids do learn a lot of their religiosity through their childhood and their parents. So, so long as the parents are really practicing Buddhists, like sincere practicing Buddhists, the kids are going to pick up on that, and that's probably the best way to teach the kids. Although in Burma, I mean, I spent more than 20 years in Burma, and you know that's exactly what they're doing in Burma. It's like the kids, from the time that they're babies practically, they're just growing up Buddhist, and they're watching their parents and they're watching grandma and all that, just doing their chanting and their beads and making the offerings. And you know, a lot of mothers, I was kind of a famous monk in Burma at the time, and a lot of mothers, you know, they want their little kids to earn merit by having their little kid put food into my bowl. So I've got this little kid with just wide eyes, like holding this banana or something, and he really doesn't know what he's doing. It's just like, Mama wants me to do this, you know, and it's like this really serious thing, you know. He's really taking it serious, and he's got the eyes wide open and puts the banana in the bowl, and then he kind of backs off because it's all done, you know. It's like mission accomplished. And you know, they learn how to do simple chanting. They learn how to take the 5 precepts and learn how to bow to monks and that sort of thing. And to what extent that would translate into the West, I'm not exactly sure. But I mean, if there were enough like serious traditionalist, conservative, Western Theravada Buddhists in the West, they could have you know, like groups, you know. They'd have like a Dharma center, and then the kids could go, and there'd be like a place where the kids could play while the parents are meditating or something. Forcing your kids to meditate is not so good, because nowadays you punish children by making them sit still. So maybe if you're good with kids and you can do like a guided meditation, you know, where you're just telling them to imagine, you know, they're getting bigger and bigger and the whole world is inside them, you know, and this kind of thing, then that can work too. But first and foremost, the best way to teach your kids and to have like a Dharma-oriented family is just for the parents to sincerely practice Dharma as well as they can, and that will just rub off on the children, and they will imitate that. That's the best I can think of. But I have relatively limited experience in the family life, so it may be that somebody else could give better advice on that one. And again, that was the last question. So anybody that has questions, anybody that likes this kind of thing, you're welcome to leave questions under the announcements on Subscribestar, on my Subscribestar page, or underneath like the YouTube video or whatever like that. And you're all welcome to sign up for Subscribestar. You don't have to necessarily pay anything. There is like a free tier where you get all the same content as everybody else, because I don't like to put things behind paywalls. And be happy. Have a nice day. I hope you could hear this, because it's like raining really hard, and there's like rain on the roof all the time. So yes, goodbye.